The night Vivienne Caldwell's empire collapsed, she was standing in the glass elevator of her own skyscraper, watching the city lights blur through her tears, wondering how a woman who had once controlled $3 billion could feel so utterly, devastatingly invisible. The screens on every monitor in the building were flashing the same two words, Sistema vulnerato, system breached, and in the span of 47 minutes, everything she had spent 14 years building had been wiped clean by a cyber attack so precise, so surgical, it felt personal. Because it was. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, please like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, where real human stories remind us what truly matters. Vivienne had started Caldwell Technologies in a one-bedroom apartment with a second-hand laptop and a credit card that was already half maxed out. She had skipped meals, slept 4 hours a night, and turned down every relationship that asked her to slow down. By 36, she was on the cover of 3 magazines and the youngest woman to ever ring the closing bell on Wall Street. She thought she had built something unbreakable. She thought she was unbreakable. But the breach didn't just take her money. It took her reputation. Stolen client data leaked across the internet within hours, and by morning, the lawsuits were already piling up like snow in a storm that would not stop. Her board of directors voted her out by 9 in the morning. Her lawyer called at 10 to tell her the personal assets tied to the company were frozen. By noon, her keycard to her own penthouse no longer worked. She stood in the marble lobby of the building she had purchased 3 years ago, holding a single box of personal belongings, wearing yesterday's clothes, with exactly $212 in a personal account that hadn't been touched in years. She had nowhere to go. Not a single person she called answered. The friends who had filled her conference rooms and her rooftop parties had vanished so completely it was as though they had never existed at all. Vivienne Caldwell, who had once commanded rooms full of investors with a single sentence, sat down on the cold steps outside her former building in the February wind and cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was 8 years old and her mother had left without saying goodbye. It was nearly midnight when she wandered into the lobby of a public office building 2 blocks away, not because she had a plan, but simply because she was cold and her feet hurt and she didn't know what else to do. The security guard at the front desk barely looked up. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a quiet, indifferent machine. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee, and in the far corner, a man in a Navy janitor's uniform was mopping the floor with the kind of steady, unhurried rhythm that suggested he had made peace with exactly where he was in the world. His name, she would later learn, was Marcus Webb. He was 41 years old, a single father to a 7-year-old girl named Lily, and he had been working the night shift at that building for 3 years. He had a degree in computer science from a state university that he'd earned while working 2 jobs, a degree he'd never been able to use because his wife had gotten sick shortly after Lily was born, and then she was gone, and suddenly a career pivot was a luxury he simply could not afford. So he mopped floors at midnight and packed Lily's lunches at 6 in the morning and read her stories about dragons and brave girls before school, and he did all of it without complaint because Lily was his whole world and the rest of it was just noise. Marcus noticed Vivienne the moment she walked in because he noticed everyone. It was a habit born of long, quiet nights when people watching was the only entertainment available. He saw the expensive coat that was now wrinkled beyond repair, the smeared mascara, the box of belongings she was clutching like it was the last solid thing in her life. He didn't ask questions. He simply walked to the small break room down the hall, poured a cup of coffee into a styrofoam cup, added 2 sugars without knowing why, and brought it to her without a word. She looked up at him like she had forgotten that strangers could be kind. He sat down nearby, not too close, not intrusive, and went back to his work, giving her the dignity of not being stared at. But when her shoulders began shaking again with silent sobs she was clearly trying to suppress, he paused his mop and said, simply and quietly, that whatever it was survivable. That he knew because he had stood in what felt like the rubble of his entire life and had found, buried underneath it, something small and unbreakable that turned out to be enough to build from. They talked for 2 hours. Not about her company or the breach or the headlines that were already crawling across the internet. They talked about fear. About the particular loneliness of losing everything while the world keeps moving. About his daughter Lily, who had recently informed him very seriously that she intended to be both an astronaut and a baker, and how that had made him laugh for the first time in months. Vivienne found herself laughing too, softly at first, then genuinely, in a way that surprised her so much she pressed her hand to her mouth like she had caught herself doing something she wasn't supposed to do. Before she left that night, Marcus did one more thing that would change everything. He asked if he could look at the public reports about her system breach. He'd seen the news alert on his phone earlier and had been mentally turning it over during his shift the way he used to turn over coding problems in college. He showed her, on his cracked phone screen, a thread he had found buried in a cybersecurity forum suggesting that the attack bore the signature pattern of a specific group, one that had a known vulnerability in their own method, a backdoor left in their own code that could be used to trace them and, potentially, to recover encrypted data. He had spotted it the way only someone trained to look for invisible things could spot it. Vivienne stared at him. Then she looked at the mop leaning against the wall. Then back at him. And something shifted so profoundly in her chest that she had to breathe through it slowly. She used her last $200 to buy them both breakfast at the diner across the street as the sun came up. Over scrambled eggs and orange juice, Marcus walked her through everything he knew. 3 weeks later, working from a borrowed laptop at a library table while Marcus contributed every spare hour his nights and weekends could offer, they had enough evidence to begin a legal counteroffensive. 6 months after that, the data was partially recovered, the perpetrators identified, and Vivienne was standing before her former board with a restored reputation and a new partner whose name she insisted be listed first on every document going forward. She never forgot the styrofoam cup. The 2 sugars she hadn't asked for. The way a man with every reason to be bitter had chosen, at midnight, to simply be kind. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the most important people in our lives are sometimes the ones the world overlooks, please give this video a like, leave a comment telling us about a time someone's small kindness changed your day, and share this story with one person who needs to hear it right now. And before you go, drop the word Marcus in the comments if you believe that kindness is never wasted, no matter who gives it or who receives it. Because the truth is, we are all, at some point, standing in a cold lobby at midnight. And all it takes is one person willing to bring the coffee.